Do you want financial independence at the age of 35? Well, guess what? I did about twice by that same age, and here's how. Okay, so you're probably looking like, how do I become financially independent now while I'm in my 30s, while I'm younger? How can I do it by 35? What's it take? I'll tell you, it's not just work for myself, but I've had other people do the same thing. I'm gonna give you that secret here in this video today. All right, so I get it, like, if you were like me, like when I was in my 20s, and maybe you're in your 30s right now, I don't know. But when I was in my 20s, I was a financial advisor at one point. I was the salesman in a suit trying to sell you on mutual funds and everything. I thought this is how I become FIRE, right? Financially independent, retire early. And I was hoping to do it by the time I was in my 40s even. And I did the numbers because I realized when we talked about this like back in the early 2000s, we found out that 4% rule, if you've heard of that, right? Which you're saying whatever you build up in your savings and your retirement accounts, you can live on 4% a year. Okay, well that's good. But we started to find out that number was probably inaccurate. And in fact, they've since found that out, that if you're trying to retire in your 60s, it's a 3% rule. The only way to be 4% is if you're in your 70s and you don't live too long, right? By the way, if you're trying to do it at 35, if you're trying to do mutual fund investments, you should be following a 2% rule, if that, depending on how soon. But if you're trying to go for 35, it's 2% that you're going for. What does that mean? Well, if you have $1 million, you're getting 4%. Well, that means you live on $40,000 a year. However, like I said, I've realized that wasn't even true even 20 years ago. We realized that number was false now. That was from 1976 that they did the studies to figure that out. People were living longer since 1976, and inflation is worse because we were taking off the gold standard in 1974. So as a result, it became more of a 3% rule if your retirement age. Well, I was still going with that. I was saying, I want to do it by my 40s. At that time, 20 years ago or so, I thought if I can just live on $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year, that would be a nice, comfortable lifestyle. Now, remember, this is before all the inflation you experienced in the last 20 plus years. Back then, $5,000 a month was more like $10,000 or $12,000 a month today. And so I did the math. I said, all right, well, if I want $5,000 a month for every million, that's $30,000 a year. I want $60,000, so I need $2 million. So I'm going to turn off the heat in the wintertime, turn off the AC in the summer. I'm going to be as cheap as possible, get the cheapest house I can possibly get, and just nickel and dime everything I can. If I can just stuff enough money in those mutual funds, I'll be there. I'll be financially independent by the time I'm about 40. Well, after being a financial advisor for 4 years, I started to realize something. One, the stock market is not going to return enough for me to get there unless I'm packing away hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Not very easy to do. Secondly, here's a problem. If I stuff it away into like a 401k and IRA, and I want to pull it out before I'm 59 and a half, guess what happens? I get slapped with a 10% penalty plus taxes. So it's the wrong vehicle. So the problem is this, is I'm seeing so many people teach about FIRE, and I know this because I was actually part of the FIRE movement. I actually literally became FIRE myself. First time I became financially independent, I was 28. Second time I was 39 because I lost everything in the recession, had to make it back again. And so what happened is, of course, like I'm seeing all these FIRE movement people say, well, I've got this much money, I'm living on 4%, and I'm gonna be cheap enough. I'm gonna minimize my lifestyle to be as cheap as possible. Screw getting married, screw having kids. I'm just gonna be dang cheap, right? Well, congratulations as a single 25-year-old that saved up $500,000. Now you think you can live on $20,000 a year because you don't spend anything. You live with your roommates, that's great. That's fantastic, but here's the problem, is that eventually you're gonna want more. You're gonna need more. And so this number keeps going up. By the way, I got kicked out of the FIRE group because I told them the 4% rule has been debunked years ago, and they didn't want to believe it. Okay, so just understand that there's those people that claim they're financially independent, but they can't really be financially independent, versus those that, like me, actually did it. On top of that, if they stuff money in their 401ks and IRAs, they really can't access that money. So they might say, oh, I'm FIRE right now. Well, yeah, well, let's put that into practice. Can you do it? I even did a podcast on this channel. If you haven't subscribed to the Money Ripples channel here, do that, because I did a podcast where I showed about this woman that was trying to retire at 40. She wrote a book. She was an author. She's like, I'm going to do it. And she's like, maybe I'll start taking those swim lessons I never did, and all that kind of stuff in her retirement years, right? But she was like, I'm going to try it out. Why? Because I guarantee she's throwing it into mutual funds, which again, you can only live on so much. So if you want to try to retire at 35, you have to have 2%. So if your goal is $100,000 a year to live on, you got to save 50 times that $100,000 a year, which is $5 million if you're going to do mutual funds. If you want to live on $50,000 a year, cut that in half. It's $2.5 million. But you got to have that in place, and then yes, you could probably do it. It's possible, but you have to have Normal mutual funds, which means you have to factor in taxes because you get taxed every year and things like that. But again, don't use the 401ks and IRAs. Bad strategy if you're trying to retire before the age of 60. Now, how do I actually do it, right? How have I done it? Not to mention many of our clients that have even done it in their 30s. This is how. Forget the stock market. Get away from that stuff because, again, living on 2% a year is hard to do. What if you can make, say, even 5 times that income? What if you can only save a fifth of that to do the same thing? For example, I talk about living on $100,000 a year. Well, I had a client, for example, that did have $1 million saved up. Now, he was 60, right? He had $1 million saved up. His financial advisor said, well, because you're in your 60s, you can live on 3% a year, $30,000 a year. He said, forget that. I'm not living on $30,000 a year, especially in California. That's like being homeless. So he said, instead, I'm actually going to go and find some alternatives. And that's what he did. He found us, he found our podcast, found this channel, and then he started to listen to us, hired us to work with him one-on-one to strategize what to do with his money. And guess what? That $1 million generated over $100,000 a year, some of it with tax advantages. So he actually has some real tax breaks, rather than the IRA where it's just always being taxed at the highest tax bracket possible. And so we were able to do that. I've had other clients. I had another client that they're in their 30s. They had their young kids. They wanted to homeschool their kids. And not just homeschool them, but homeschool them abroad. They wanted to be expats. They wanted to do it like a place like Costa Rica or Mexico, somewhere warmer than Utah. And so what did they do? They came to us and we said, let's look at your situation. Where can we get your money liquid, right? Like where can we get money out? And so we started looking at different stuff. We realized they got a lot of equity in their home. It had built up over the years. I said, what if you sell your house? Because you're going to need to move abroad anyways. They're like, well, could we turn to a rental? I was like, we could, but look at the numbers. Numbers doesn't make you nearly as much money as if we just take the equity out by selling the house. That was the best way to do it rather than refinancing. Selling their house, take that money and investing it even into other types of real estate, but now you're getting income at a much higher rate. Now they had enough money to go in that he quit his job. She had her part-time business that she did online anyways, and then they were able to move to Mexico, homeschooling her kids and doing stuff, living in Cabo, which, by the way, is a vacation spot for me, not a place where I live, but that's where they live now, doing that, and they'll come back to the U.S. to go visit family and things like that. Again, they didn't have to wait till 59 and a half or 60 years old because they didn't have their money locked away in those 401ks. By the way, he did have a 401k, but eventually he got rid of it, right? Also, I had another client as well where his whole goal, he was in his late 20s. He said, Chris, I've mapped it out. And this is what he did. He said, Chris, I'm now putting money in this infinite banking policy you set up for us, right? So I'm doing that because he can get tax-free income by storing money in that. And he can pull it out before 59 and a half. So it's like a Roth without all the dumb rules. So he put money in there, but he's also buying real estate. He was only buying about 1 or 2 rentals a year. And so with that, as it starts to build up, even just a few $100s a month at a time, within 9 years, he says, Chris, there it is. I'm in my mid-30s, 33 years old, and I'm able to now pull off $5,000 a month. Now the $5,000 a month, that's $60,000 a year. Remember, if you're trying to do that when you're younger, you have to multiply that by 50. He would have to have $3 million in mutual funds. He did not have to save $3 million at all, not even anywhere close. Most of these properties he's buying with maybe like $20,000, $30,000 out of pocket for each property. So yeah, he might have built up about 10, 12 properties. And then I said, well, yeah, but your properties are only cash flowing roughly about $4,000 a month. He's like, yeah, but Chris, look over here. Remember we set up that infinite banking policy, that tax-free high-yield savings account that we have with life insurance. We set that up over here. I can actually pull off over $10,000 a year from that, tax-free. Now, I actually doubted him. Even though we set it up, I doubted him. I was like, is that true? I ran the numbers myself, and he was exactly right on. That's exactly where it'd be. And again, it doesn't have all the market risks and things like that to worry about. And so literally, he's like, yeah, by the time I'm about 33, 34 years old, I'm already on track to having over $5,000 a month of passive income. That is so much easier than trying to save up $3 million to then live on that. And of course, the great thing is you can still keep working. You don't have to stop. But maybe you start picking a different job. Maybe you pick something that's more part-time that allows you more freedom to work on passion projects. Maybe you want to do more service abroad. Maybe you want to go and serve people. By the way, my friends in Cabo also do service projects out there too and try to help people that are less fortunate. I mean, so many things you can do when you have that financial freedom when you're younger. And think of the education and the things you can offer your family, especially your children at that kind of age. You might worry about spoiling them, but that's not the case at all. Like, you can definitely raise them the way that you want, to teach them lessons, give them experiences they would never have otherwise, because you would be stuck in that 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 job or business that you can't ever walk away from. And you'll just keep telling them, well, someday, yeah, when I get to blank, then we can do this. When I get to do this, then we can do Disneyland. When we get to this place, then we can do this. And next thing you know, your kids are moved out, they've moved on, and they're now making those same excuses to their own children, your grandchildren, and you just created a legacy of scarcity and really delay and sacrifice, right? For no reason at all, when you could actually be doing that today. So anyways, I can go on and on about stories that I have, not just from my own life and how I was able to do it for myself, but also our clients too. The best thing you can do is if you want to know how much passive income you could create even right now in the next 12 months, go to moneyripples.com, fill out the passive income calculator, and it'll spit out the number to show you how much annual income you could be making in the next year. Go try that out right now.